Welcome back to Stormi Talks True Crime on my Girls Rock Protections channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about a case that re-entered the news a couple years back because of an appeal being granted. The case of Scott Peterson, the man who murdered and allegedly dismembered his wife, Laci Peterson, who was 8 months pregnant with his unborn son, Connor, back in 2002. I'm going to start by giving some background information on the people involved, starting with the man of the hour, Scott Peterson. Scott Lee Peterson was born October 24th, 1972 in San Diego, California. He is the only child of Lee and Jackie Peterson, though both of his parents have other children from previous relationships. Jackie Peterson died of cancer at the age of 70 in 2013. Scott grew up in a San Diego suburb and was a model student and an avid golfer. He graduated from the University of San Diego High School and spent a semester at Arizona State University before returning home to attend Cuesta College in San Luis Obispo. In 1994, he transferred to nearby California Polytech State University, where he majored in agricultural business. Now let's talk a little bit about our victim, Laci Peterson. Laci was born Laci Denise Rocha on May 4th, 1975, so she was a Taurus. She was the younger of two children of Sharon and Dennis Robert Rocha, and had an older brother named Brent. Her parents had met in high school and had owned a dairy farm west of Escalon, California. Laci worked on the dairy farm from a young age and also enjoyed gardening with her mother. Laci's parents divorced when she and her brother were young. Subsequently, their mother moved with the children to Modesto, and Laci would visit her father at the dairy farm on the weekends. Laci's mother developed a long-term relationship with Ron Bransky. Bransky would help raise the children from the time Laci was just 2 years old. Laci was a cheerleader in junior high and high school. After graduating from Thomas Downey High School, she attended California Polytech State University, majoring in ornamental horticulture. While at Cal Poly, Scott worked at Pacific Cafe, a restaurant in Morro Bay. Laci would occasionally visit the restaurant to see a friend who also worked there. In mid-1994, Laci sent Scott her phone number. She would also tell her mother that she had just met the man she was going to marry. Scott later called Laci and they began dating. As the relationship grew more serious, Scott put aside his dreams of professional golf in order to focus on a business career. The couple dated for 2 years and eventually moved in together. In 1997, after Laci graduated, they married at Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort. While Scott finished his senior year, Laci took a job in nearby Prudell. Prosecutors later stated that around this time is when Scott engaged in his first extramarital affair, though they did not reveal the details of the relationship. Soon after Scott graduated in 1998, they opened up a sports bar and burger joint called The Shack, eventually selling the profitable business and moving to Modesto, about 90 miles east of San Francisco, to be closer to Laci's family. There, Scott got a job selling fertilizer and Laci became a substitute teacher. Laci's family, including her mother and younger sister, relayed that she devoted much of her energy towards being the perfect housewife, and that she enjoyed cooking, entertaining, and watching Martha Stewart. In 2002, Laci discovered that she was pregnant. Her due date was February 10, 2003. The couple had planned to name their son Connor. In November of 2002, Scott was introduced by a friend to Amber Fry, a Fresno massage therapist, and the two began a romantic relationship. Then, on December 23, 2002, at 5:45 p.m., Laci and Scott went to Salon, the workplace of Laci's sister, Amy Rocha. Amy cut Scott's hair as she did every month, and Scott offered to pick up a fruit basket that Amy had ordered because he would be playing golf the next day at a course near the retailer. Prosecutors say that Scott also told other people that he would play golf on Christmas Eve. Laci's mother spoke with Laci on the telephone around 8:30 that evening, and the last three people known to have spoken to Laci before she disappeared were Amy, Sharon, Laci's mother, and Scott. Scott would later tell police that he last saw his wife about 9:30 a.m. on December 24th when he left to go fishing at Berkeley Marina. He said Laci was watching a Martha Stewart TV show about meringues and preparing to mop the floor, bake cookies, and walk the family dog to a nearby park. Karen Service, a neighbor of the Petersons, said that she found the Petersons' dog, a golden retriever named Mackenzie, alone outside the home and returned him to the Petersons' backyard around 10:30 a.m. She later testified that she found the dog at 10:18. Another neighbor, Mike Chiavetta, said he saw Mackenzie about 10:45 a.m. as he played catch with his own dog. The Modesto Bee reported that an unnamed female neighbor found the dog with a muddy leash wandering in the neighborhood. That neighbor put the dog back in the Petersons' yard, not observing anything was out of place. At 2:15 p.m., Scott left a message for Laci stating, "Hey beautiful, it's 2:15, I'm leaving Berkeley." Scott said when he returned home that afternoon, Laci's car was in the driveway and the house was empty. He also said that he found Mackenzie in the backyard and that he relayed this information to Laci's mother, Sharon. Sharon would later deny his account in her book. Scott then showered and washed his clothes. A neighbor of Scott's later said that Scott had knocked on his door asking if he had seen Laci. The neighbor and his wife would both testify overhearing Scott saying that he had been golfing that day and had tried to call Laci. A relative of Laci's would also later testify that when family and friends began gathering at the Peterson home that night, Scott said he had earlier gone to play golf. So already there are differing stories, since he told the police he was fishing in the marina and told multiple other friends, family members, and neighbors that he was playing golf. Scott called his mother-in-law Sharon to ask if Laci was with her. Sharon subsequently said that that call was when she learned that Laci was missing. Scott and Laci's stepfather both reported her missing. The police received the report of her disappearance shortly before 6 p.m. At the time of her disappearance, Laci was 7.5 months pregnant with a due date of February 10, 2003, so the story attracted media attention nationwide. Modesto police detectives Alan Bercini and John Bueller responded to the missing person call and became the lead investigators for the case. Upon their arrival at the Peterson home, the detectives interviewed Scott and performed a cursory search of the home. Scott told detectives that he had been fishing for sturgeon at the Berkeley Marina, approximately 90 miles from the couple's Modesto home. Detectives found Laci's keys, wallet, sunglasses, and purse in a closet and began organizing a search for the area. The following day, over 900 of Laci's family, friends, and neighbors searched the neighborhood and posted missing person flyers. At a press conference, Detective Al Bercini said police did not believe Laci left without contacting her family. That is completely out of character for her, he stated. Over 30 Modesto police and firefighters on foot, horseback, bicycles, and watercraft used K9 units and searchlight-equipped helicopters to search Dry Creek and the surrounding areas. A $25,000 reward was offered, later increased to $250,000, and finally to $500,000 for information leading to Laci's safe return. Posters, blue and yellow ribbons, and flyers were circulated. The original basic version of the LaciPeterson.com website was launched by the husband of one of Laci's friends. Family, friends, and volunteers set up command center at the Red Lion Hotel to take phone calls, record developments, and circulate information. Over 1,500 volunteers distributed information, worked at the command center, searched for Laci, and held candlelight vigils with Scott for Laci. Although detectives did not initially consider the case suspicious, they suspected foul play almost immediately and became increasingly suspicious of Scott as they continued their investigation into Laci's disappearance. Bueller told ABC News in 2017, "I suspected Scott when I first met him. Didn't mean he did it, but I was a little bit thrown off by his calm, cool demeanor and his lack of questioning. He wasn't, 'Will you call me back? Can I have one of your cards? What are you guys doing now?'" Bueller further described Scott's behavior as a strange combination of polite and arrogant, disaffectedly distant, and impatiently irritable. He just didn't seem like a man who was crushed or even greatly disturbed by his wife's disappearance and possible death. The Rocha family defended Scott, describing him and Laci as the ideal couple. The nationwide coverage produced several tips and possible sightings, one of which was from a woman who identified herself as Scott's girlfriend. On December 30th, 2002, Amber Fry informed detectives she had met Scott without his wife. Based on dates and information Fry provided, detectives now believed that Scott began planning to kill Laci 2 weeks before Laci's disappearance. Hoping Scott would confess or reveal information about his involvement in Laci's disappearance, detectives gave Fry a device which would record her conversations with Scott. On January 15, 2003, detectives informed Laci's immediate family of Scott's affair with Amber. Upon learning of Scott's affair with Amber Fry, Sharon Rocha told detectives she believed Scott killed Laci. On January 24th, Sharon, Ron, and Laci's brother Brent held a press conference in which Brent said Scott had, in a phone call on January 16th, told Brent he was having an affair with a woman in Fresno. Brent Rocha also stated that the Rochas no longer supported Scott Peterson due to his refusal to communicate with the family and cooperate with the police. Later that same day, Amber Fry held a press conference and explained her role in the investigation. On April 13, 2003, two people walking their dog found the body of a male fetus on a tidal flat of the San Francisco Bay Shore in Richmond's Point Isabel Regional Shoreline Park. The following day, a jogger spotted a human torso in the riprap along the Point Isabel shoreline, approximately 1 mile from where the body of the fetus was found on April 18, 2003. DNA tests verified the bodies were Laci and her unborn son, Connor. The autopsies on both bodies were performed by forensic pathologist Brian Peterson, no relation to Scott. Although a judge sealed the autopsy results, an anonymous Associated Press source revealed Connor's body had minor decomposition, mutilations on his right side, and a length of nylon cord wrapped around his body. The source of the mutilations and how the cord became wrapped around Connor's body could not be conclusively determined. Laci's body was bloated, missing her head, arms, most of her legs, her internal organs, and severely decomposed. The autopsy revealed Laci had 2 cracked ribs and her uterus and cervix were intact. Neither Laci's date of death nor whether the broken ribs occurred post-mortem could conclusively be determined. The missing head and limbs led to rumors that Scott had dismembered Laci beforehand, but Dr. Peterson found no human-made incisions. Dr. Peterson and state forensic pathologists testified the missing organs and disarticulation were conditions consistent with the body being weighed at the wrists and ankles and submerged in seawater for several months. Laci's head, arms, and legs were never recovered. Dr. Peterson concluded that Connor died in utero and his body was expelled from Laci's decomposing corpse when the skin over the abdominal cavity ruptured due to natural decompositional processes. Seawater entered into the abdominal cavity and washed out most of Laci's internal organs, including Connor. Laci and Connor were buried at Burwood Cemetery on August 30th, 2003. Their headstone omits the surname Peterson, per request of Laci's mother and stepfather. Thus, Laci is named under her maiden name, Rocha. The deaths of Laci and Connor Peterson led to the passage of the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, which is also known as the Laci and Connors Law. On April 1st, 2004, Sharon Rocha and her husband, Ron Gransky, were in attendance at the White House when President George W. Bush signed the bill into law. The act provides that, under federal law, any person who causes death or injury to an unborn child during the commission of a crime upon a pregnant woman will be charged with a separate offense. The discovery of Laci and Connor's bodies changed the case status from missing person to homicide and allowed the detectives to expand their investigation of Scott Peterson as a prime suspect. The FBI and Modesto Police Department performed forensic searches of the Peterson home. Using mitochondrial DNA testing, the FBI linked a hair wrapped around a pair of pliers found in Scott's fishing boat to hairs recovered from Laci's hairbrush. Police searched Scott's truck, toolbox, and warehouse and found a homemade concrete anchor in the boathouse Scott purchased 2 weeks before he reported Laci missing. Scott told detectives he used a 90-pound bag of concrete to make one boat anchor and used the rest of the concrete to repair his driveway. When Detective Henry Dodge Henley searched Scott's warehouse on December 27th, he found cement powder on the boat trailer and 5 circular marks matching the size and shape of the bucket used to make the anchor. Henley also found a sledgehammer and dustpan covered with cement powder. Prosecutors alleged that Scott made 5 anchors and used 4, one tied to each of Laci's wrists and ankles, to sink Laci's body in the San Francisco Bay. After Scott was arrested, police searched San Francisco Bay for the anchors, but nothing was ever found. Using a GPS locator they placed on Scott's car, Detectives Brochini and Bueller tracked Scott to San Diego. Anticipating Peterson was planning to evade arrest by fleeing to Mexico, the detectives immediately began electronically monitoring Peterson's activities, but discovered Peterson had switched vehicles, rendering their GPS locator useless. Police increased their surveillance of Peterson, following his car and monitoring his location by listening to his cell phone calls. Since Peterson had switched vehicles and was less than 30 miles from the Mexican border, detectives were certain Peterson was planning to flee to Mexico. Detective Brochini said in a 2017 interview, "We've got to find Scott right now. He told me he was at Brooks Island and that's where the bodies come up. I believe it was premeditated. He planned it. San Diego was pretty darn close to the Mexican border. Scott knew the area pretty well. That's where his parents lived. That's where he lived. So it wasn't like he was going to have to get on MapQuest to figure out the way to Tijuana." On April 18, 2003, detectives arrested Peterson at Torrey Pines Golf Course in La Jolla as he was meeting his father and brother for a game of golf. Peterson had dyed his hair and beard blonde, and his vehicle was packed with equipment and supplies, including nearly $15,000 in cash, Viagra tablets, camping and survival equipment, several changes of clothes, 4 cell phones, and 2 driver's licenses, his and his brother's. Laci Peterson, Scott's father, explained that Scott used his brother's license to get a San Diego resident discount at the golf course and was living in his car to avoid media attention and harassment. Police and prosecutors alleged that the switched car, dyed hair, money, phones, driver's license, and camping equipment indicated that Peterson was trying to disguise himself to flee to Mexico. Detectives Brochini and Bueller drove Peterson back to Modesto, where Peterson was booked into Stanislaus County Jail. On April 21, 2003, Peterson was arraigned in Stanislaus County Superior Court and charged with 2 felony counts of murder with premeditation and special circumstances, to which he pleaded not guilty. Because of the intense publicity, community involvement, and small pool of potential jurors in Stanislaus County, Judge Al Girolami moved the trial to San Mateo County to avoid defense accusations of juror bias and ensure Peterson received a fair trial. Before his arraignment, Peterson had been represented by Kirk McAllister, a veteran criminal defense attorney from Modesto. Chief Deputy Public Defender Kent Faulkner was also assigned to the case. Peterson later indicated that he could afford a private attorney named Mark Geragos, who had done other high-profile criminal defense work. Scott's trial began on June 1, 2004, and was followed closely by news media. The lead prosecutor was Rick DeStesso, and Geragos led Scott's defense team. Prosecution witness Fry hired her own attorney, Gloria Allred, to represent her. On June 23, 2004, one of the jurors was dismissed by Judge Alfred DeLucci after DeLucci spent 2 hours in his chambers questioning each of the jurors. Prior to DeLucci's June interview, the aforementioned juror had been recorded on video speaking to Laci's brother, Brent Rocha. DeLucci had initially stated that this exchange had not warranted removal. He did not give reason for the juror's later dismissal, although the transcript of DeLucci's session with him indicated that the juror had admitted that his girlfriend and others had spoken to him about news reports of his encounter with Rocha. DeLucci furthermore warned the remaining jurors not to read, watch, or listen to media coverage of the trial. In opening statements, the prosecution said that they would show that Scott had killed his wife because he was having an affair with Fry. The state chiefly detailed Scott's behavior in the days before and after his wife was reported missing, including telling others he had been golfing and asking police if they had used cadaver dogs to investigate the park in which Laci was supposed to have walked their dog. The defense conceded that Scott was a cad for cheating on Laci, but ridiculed the prosecution's theory that Scott was going to chuck this entire life he had for a masseuse mistress he had taken on only 4 dates. Garagos said that the police had rushed to judgment, noting that police had discredited Scott's claim that Laci was watching a segment of Martha Stewart Living on Making Meringues because they stated no meringue was mentioned on that program that morning. But Garagos played a tape in court of that day's morning episode, which showed that the segment was about baking meringues. Finally, Garagos emphasized the prosecution's lack of forensic evidence. He dismissed a hair of Laci's found in Scott's boat because Laci had visited the boat a few days before her disappearance and could have left it then. Lacking direct evidence to link Scott to the crime, prosecutors chiefly relied on circumstantial evidence, pointing in particular to Scott's behavior before, during, and after Laci's disappearance. Through various witnesses, and prosecution suggested that Scott had several motives for killing Laci, and that he was tired of his marriage, that he felt pressure from her pregnancy, that he wanted to continue his affair with Fry, and that he was under mounting financial pressure. Prosecutors claimed that Scott strangled Laci before making cement anchors to weigh his wife's body down in the San Francisco Bay. Sharon Rocha testified that when she went to East Loloma Park to search for Laci, she saw Scott there. But she said Scott did not acknowledge her calling out to him, and that he later angled away from her attempts to hug him, and failed to attend the candlelight vigil. 2 other relatives of Laci said that Scott had shown little emotion during Laci's disappearance, and 3 witnesses testified that Scott had told them he had been golfing, not fishing, after Laci's disappearance. The prosecution called upon various witnesses to establish that Scott changed his appearance, purchased a vehicle using his mother's name, and added 2 pornographic TV channels to his cable services days after his wife's disappearance. A realtor testified in January of 2003 Scott expressed interest in selling the house he had shared with Laci, saying he did not want her to have to live in the home if she were to be found alive. A salesman testified that Scott had traded in Laci's Land Rover for a Dodge pickup truck after her disappearance. Fry testified as to her affair with Scott, and the jury heard the secretly recorded telephone calls between the pair. In one recorded after Laci's disappearance, Scott falsely said that he was in Paris. As to the Petersons' financial condition, an auditor testified to the prosecution that the couple had been living beyond their means and accumulated $23,000 in credit card debt. During cross-examination, the auditor also stated that Scott had paid all of his bills on time and had $50,000 in credit available on other cards. Prosecution witness Rodney Oswalt said that neither of the 2 hair follicles found on Scott's boat belonged to Scott, though he said he could not determine whether or not they belonged to Laci. Karen Korsberg, a FBI trace evidence expert, said that she matched one of the hairs to a hair found in Laci's hairbrush through mitochondrial DNA tests. The prosecution further suggested that the hair must have come from Laci's dead body because she had not seen the boat while alive. Defense lawyers argued that mitochondrial testing was not a reliable means of DNA comparison, because at the time only half of the states in the U.S. allowed the practice, and further contended that Laci had, in fact, been on the boat while alive. A witness reported that she had seen Laci at the warehouse with the boat the day before she was reported missing. On the stand, Detective Alan Proschini explained that he had excised the witness's statement from his police report. Prosecution witness Robert O'Neill was asked to comment on Scott's claim that he had used a 90-pound bag of cement to make a single anchor and pave his driveway. O'Neill said that the material in the anchor did not match the sample of concrete from the driveway because the driveway sample featured large gravel-like chunks. Conversely, for the defense, Steve Gabler, a concrete expert, testified that samples were consistent. Gabler said that the gravel chunks had adhered to the driveway's concrete because the concrete was poured on top of those chunks. Scott's defense attorney, Mark Garagos, also pointed out that no such anchors were found after a search of the floor of the San Francisco Bay with sonar equipment accurate enough to locate objects as small as a tin can. But Jeffrey Baer, who helped lead more than 15 dive expeditions off of the Berkeley Marina to search for Laci, testified that thick mud, strong currents, dark waters, and a strong surge can make it virtually impossible for such equipment to locate an object, even when the target is known, and that this is why they did not find Laci's body or any anchors. To emphasize this point, Bear related that when his crew accidentally dropped the underwater sonar device into the water, it took 4 dive trips to locate it, even though the crew knew precisely where it had landed. Rick Chang, a hydrologist with the United States Geological Survey and an expert witness on tides of the San Francisco Bay, testified as a witness for the prosecution. He suggested that Laci may have been dumped near where Scott had said he was fishing. During cross-examination, Chang admitted that his findings were probable, not precise. Scott's defense lawyers based their case on the lack of direct evidence and played down the significance of circumstantial evidence, but when there's that much circumstantial evidence, you can't really just downplay it. They also questioned whether the investigation was thorough, since Modesto Police Detective Mike Hermos admitted he did not check the alibi of a prostitute who was accused of stealing checks from Scott's mailbox. Which is also absurd in my opinion, but hey, they're desperate at this point. Hermos did not indicate that the woman was ever a suspect, and prosecutor Dave Harris noted that the checks were stolen after Laci vanished, precluding the woman from involvement in her disappearance. A police community service officer testified that the playback of an interview with Scott had no sound because no batteries had been placed in the tape recorder that was used to record it. Other detectives were called to testify about extensive search for evidence. The defense suggested that fetal remains were of a full-term infant and theorized that someone had kidnapped Laci, held her until she gave birth, and then dumped both bodies in the bay. The prosecutor's medical experts contended that the fetus was not full-term and died at the same time as his mother. As to this matter, Dr. Charles March, a fertility specialist, was expected to be a crucial witness for the defense. March said that the Petersons' unborn fetus could not have died any earlier than December 29, 2002. Under cross-examination, March said that he had based his finding on a report by one of Laci's friends, who had said that Laci had told her that a June 9, 2002 at-home pregnancy test had produced a positive reading. But the prosecution criticized March for having relied on a friend's report. After prosecutors criticized March for a typo in his report, he remarked, "Cut me some slack." One juror was removed and replaced during deliberations due to misconduct after she conducted independent research on the case. The jury foreman, an attorney, requested his own removal, most likely because his fellow jurors wanted to replace him as foreman. Garagos told reporters that the foreman had mentioned threats he received when he requested to be removed from the jury. The foreman was replaced by an alternate. On November 12, 2004, the jury convicted Scott of 2 counts of murder: first-degree murder with special circumstances for killing Laci, and second-degree murder for killing the fetus she carried. The penalty phase of the trial began on November 30th and concluded on December 13th when the jury rendered the sentence of death. On March 16th, Judge DeLucci also followed the jury's verdict, sentencing Scott to death by lethal injection and ordering him to pay $10,000 towards the cost of Laci's funeral. He described the murder of Laci as cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous. In later press appearances, members of the jury stated that they believed Scott's demeanor, specifically his lack of emotion and phone calls to Fry in the days following Laci's disappearance, indicated his guilt. Juror number 1, Greg Baritas, and 2 other jurors said they based their verdict on the hundreds of small puzzle pieces of circumstantial evidence that came out during the trial, from the location of Laci's body to the myriad of lies her husband told after her disappearance. On October 21, 2005, Stanislaus County, California Superior Court Judge Roger Bochesney ruled that Scott was not entitled to collect Laci's $250,000 life insurance policy as he had been convicted of her murder. Under California state law, criminals may not profit from insurance policies. On December 19, 2005, the money was given to her mother, Sharon Rocha, as her executor of her estate. The California 5th District Court of Appeals in Fresno later affirmed the trial court's decision on October 31, 2007. A $25 million wrongful death lawsuit was later filed against Scott Peterson by Laci's mother and stepfather, but was dropped in April of 2009. Scott arrived at San Quentin State Prison in early morning hours of Thursday, March 17, 2005. He was reported to have not slept the night before, being too jazzed to sleep. He joined the more than 700 other inmates of California's sole death row facility during the appeals process. Scott's automatic appeal of his death sentence was filed in the Supreme Court of California on July 5, 2012. The next day, Scott's attorney, Cliff Gardner, filed a 423-page brief contesting this sentence, arguing that the publicity surrounding the trial, incorrect evidentiary rulings, and other mistakes deprived Scott of a fair trial. The State Attorney General's office filed their response brief on January 26, 2015. The defense filed a response to the state's brief in July of 2015. Claiming that the certified dog that detected Laci's scent at Berkeley Marina had failed 2/3 of its tests with similar conditions, which really doesn't matter in my opinion because that is where her body actually showed up anyway, but whatever. In June 2020, the California Supreme Court heard argument on Scott's direct appeal. The defense argued that the prospective jurors were improperly excused, that the trial judge improperly allowed 2 jurors onto Scott's boat. The judge erred in insisting the prosecution be present during the defense testing of the boat, and that the motion to move the trial to another county should have been granted due to questionnaire results showing almost half of the prospective jurors had already concluded Scott was guilty prior to the trial. The prosecution countered that the California Supreme Court should overturn the verdict only if it were to find that a prospective juror was improperly dismissed, and that there was no credible claim that any of the 12 jurors who decided Scott's fate were unfair or partial. On August 24, 2020, in a 7-0 decision, the Supreme Court of California upheld Scott's conviction but overturned his death sentence, which I don't personally completely agree with, but the court did find that Scott's trial judge had improperly dismissed jurors who opposed capital punishment without asking them whether they could put their views aside, which seems like a stupid reason to me. Apparently, though, as Judge Leonard Kruger explained, per Supreme Court ruling since 1968, jurors may not be excused merely for opposition to the death penalty, but only for views rendering them unable to fairly consider imposing that penalty in accordance with their oath. This is the meaning of the guarantee of an impartial jury. Prosecutors initially stated that they would retry the penalty phase, but subsequently reversed that decision in June 2021. On September 22, 2021, California Supreme Court Judge Anne Christine Masullo ruled that Scott would be resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The following month, Masullo scheduled a hearing on that matter for December 8th. On December 8th, Masullo resentenced Scott to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder of Laci and a concurrent sentence of 15 years to life for the second-degree murder of Connor. In October of 2022, Scott was transferred from San Quentin's death row to Mule Creek State Prison in in Ione, California. But things weren't going to end there. In November of 2015, Scott filed a habeas corpus petition. While the direct appeal could only challenge errors made by the trial judge, Scott's habeas petition could include new evidence that neighbors saw Laci alive after Scott left home. On August 10, 2017, a state attorney general filed a 150-page response arguing that the habeas petition ignored overwhelming evidence that Scott murdered Laci. Supervising Deputy Attorney General Donna Provenzano discounted eyewitness spottings of Laci, saying that such sightings were legion, while noting 74 reported sightings in 26 states and overseas, most of which she stated were neither viable or corroborated. In August 2018, Scott's legal team filed their reply, emphasizing 6 claims of deficient performance by trial attorney Mark Geragos, such as failing to call experts in fetal growth, dog scent, how bodies move in water, stating that he would call witnesses but failing to follow through, and failing to properly address burglary evidence. In October of 2020, the California Supreme Court, in response to the habeas petition, issued a showcase order instructing the lower court to consider the question of juror misconduct. On December 20th, 2022, Judge Masulo denied Scott's habeas petition, which had been based in part on the allegation that a juror committed misconduct, which she lied about her own history of domestic abuse during the jury selection. Scott's appeal said that her history had tainted the jury. Masulo concluded that there was no evidence to support this accusation, explaining that the juror did not intentionally conceal this information with the motive to stay on the jury, nor did she appear vengeful towards Scott in letters she later wrote him in prison. Masulo wrote, "The court concludes that juror number 7's responses were not motivated by pre-existing or improper bias against Scott, but instead were a result of a combination of good faith misunderstanding of the questions and sloppiness in answering. Scott still had the legal option of appealing her ruling." On March 12, 2024, Scott attended a status hearing in Redwood City that had been granted by San Mateo County judge in response to a request by LA Innocence Project, a nonprofit legal advocacy organization that accepted Peterson's case 2 months prior. The project said that it had new evidence from a trial, which the project said supported Peterson's claims of innocence. On April 23rd, the prosecution responded to the new push for DNA testing, describing it as unnecessary. He noted that Scott Peterson had lied about the circumstances surrounding his wife's murder and that such DNA testing was already done in 2013 and again in 2019. In May 2024, a judge granted Peterson's motion to allow DNA testing on one single item of evidence, a piece of duct tape found on Laci's pants during her autopsy, while rejecting all other requests for further testing. On October 7, 2024, a judge granted Peterson's request for post-conviction discovery, allowing his defense team to access evidence held by the authorities which they claim was withheld at Peterson's trial. So this case is still ongoing today. In September 2006, former U.S. Congressman William E. Dannemeyer sent a letter to the California Attorney General and other officials arguing that Laci had been killed by members of a satanic cult, not by Scott, which is absolutely ridiculous. In 2006, Sharon Rocha published For Laci, A Mother's Story of Love, Loss, and Justice, her biography and memoir about Laci's life and death. All proceeds are used to fund the Laci and Connor Search and Rescue Fund, which she had founded. On January 29, 2006, it was listed at number 1 on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list. Laci's stepfather, Ron Gransky, died in his sleep at his Modesto home on April 8, 2018, at the age of 71. This followed a lengthy period of failing health. He was buried next to Laci and Connor in Burwood Cemetery. Laci's father, Dennis Rocha, died December 9, 2018, at the age of 72. He was buried in Lakewood Memorial Park. That concludes this week's video on Stormi Talks True Crime, The Body in the Bay. In my personal opinion, I think Scott Peterson was, in fact, guilty of Laci and Connor's murders. And I also think that anyone who could kill their pregnant wife and unborn child deserves the death penalty. So he is getting off light with the life in prison without parole. While there might not be much physical evidence, the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. Feel free to discuss your thoughts on this story in the comments below or give suggestions on other cases you may want to hear about. Remember to like the video and subscribe to my Girls Rock Productions channel. And while you're here, check out some of my other playlists. On Stormi Teaches Music, I do live covers and guitar lessons on Mondays and Wednesdays at 11 p.m. Eastern. I do the live covers on Mondays and the lesson for the song I covered on Wednesdays. On Stormi Talks Ghost Stories, I talk about different haunted city each month and tell true ghost stories out of those cities. These videos are posted Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. Now don't forget to tune in next Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern for next week's video on Stormi Talks True Crime. Until then, have a great week and stay safe.